And now in breaking no pun included news, we have a copy of the much coveted and very heavy Scythe. And if you don't know anything about Scythe, it takes place in an alternate 1920s Eastern European history. And now over to our Eastern European correspondent in Pan-Eastern Europe.
Yes, hello Elaine, we are indeed right now live in Eastern Europe. It's very exciting. There's a Eastern European road, that's a Eastern European house, that's Eastern European lamppost, and some Eastern European people, that's a Eastern European rubbish bin.
Efka, hang on. What are you talking about? Is this really Eastern Europe? You're not talking about borscht or larders or scythes?
Do you know what? I'm rather tired of these stereotypes. Life here in Eastern Europe is normal. There's roads and buildings and everything. It's just like everywhere else. There's certainly no hard-working workers ploughing the fields or no cows everywhere. There's certainly not people carrying around scythes in their hands walking down the street. There's a person behind me carrying a scythe, isn't there? If you haven't heard of Scythe, then all I have to say is that the Board Game Geek user base has voted this as the #1 most anticipated game of 2016. And I can proudly say that even though you might think, no pun included, is influenced by the hype, well, do you know what? We're just impervious to hype. In fact, receiving an early copy has bared absolutely no significance on us whatsoever. We are getting an early review copy of Scythe. Look, as soon as you open the box of Scythe, you get the promise of something truly epic and grandiose in proportions. Not only is there an amazing set of mechs and miniatures, but you get this board that is probably bigger than your house and carriage and that little annex where your grandma sleeps put together. And not only that, this is a 4X game with a big map that has hexes. This is all we truly want. But here's the key thing and the really important thing. I think a lot of board game designers have been trying to condense the 4X experience into that sweet 2 hours. Something we never had. Eclipse, Twilight Imperium, Archipelago, all of those games take at least 4 hours to play. And enter Scythe. After you've taught everyone the rules, which aren't really that complicated, this is strictly a 2-hour experience, even with 5 players.
When you wear the Scythe player board as a hat, it feels a bit complicated because there's all these symbols and pictures and you don't know what any of it means. But when the game has been explained to you and you've set up your player board and it looks beautiful, better than mine hopefully, then it will all become clear. In fact, Efka says, hashtag, it's a little bit like sitting in a limo. It's comfortable and elegant and it feels good.
Look, I know the limo analogy is a bit far-fetched, but it is true. Here's the thing, Scythe is full of mnemonic devices for rules. So, for example, when you want to build a building and you don't know where it goes, the player board tells you immediately that it goes onto a hex with a meeple on it, which is your worker. That's really nice, and Scythe has perfected that to a T. And it's not the only psyche trick it kind of does. You see, Scythe is all about collecting stars, because once one player places all 6 of the stars, the game ends immediately. And one of the most common questions you get about stars is, well, what do they actually do? And the answer is they do nothing. Well, that's not entirely true. They give you some victory points at the end of the game. But aside from that, they have no other game impact aside from on your psyche, because when do you get a star? When you did really well. So if all stars give you is victory points, which in this game, by the way, are coins, and yes, they are a spendable resource, then you might ask me, Efka, how do you get stars? Well, you get stars for doing things to completion. So for example, if you deploy all 4 of your mechs, then you get a star because you did very well. If you build all 4 of your buildings, then you also get a star. And if you drink all the borscht that comes in the game, then you get a star. And yes, there are 5 instant packages of borscht in every box of Scythe. But if all stars do is give you victory points, What resource is more important than that? And I'll tell you, in Scythe, the most important resource is love. And you might be saying, Efka, what's love got to do with it? Got to do with it? What's love
Efka,
if you don't want to make a change?
Stop. They really,
What's love?
Stop. They really don't need to hear that, right?
I thought I was quite in tune.
A more useful way of looking at that, or the popularity track, as it's really known, not the love track, is how many victory points is going to help you get at the end of the game. Now, while you will score victory points for your stars, how many hexes you control, and also how many resources you have at the end of the game, the victory points and the coins will depend on where you are on this popularity track. Now, it doesn't look like much. It goes 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. It only goes up in increments of 1. But actually, moving up that will make a huge difference towards the amount of coins you will have at the end of the game.
I think I liked it better when I was singing. I think that was a better thing. Look, stars and hearts might all be fine, but you're asking how do I actually play the game? One, the gameplay mostly comes from this production board, and that's what brings most of the similarities of Scythe to Terra Mystica. You see, it uses that same sort of mechanic of I take something off my player board, I put it on the map, and that becomes better in many regards, for exceptions of workers. See, the more workers you build, the more it costs to produce things, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So, whilst the gameplay basically goes in turns, there are no rounds because you do your turn, then the player next to you does their turn, and then it keeps going. All you're really doing on your turn is taking this little pawn and putting it on one of these 4 spaces. Now, each of these spaces has a top action and a bottom action, and you can take either one you like, or you can take even both of them if you want it. It's like having your cake and then eating it. See, top actions are easy because they barely have any costs whatsoever, or sometimes no costs at all, and they let you do simple things that interact with the board, like producing resources where you have workers, or moving around, just going somewhere. That's always pretty nice. Or even just getting some power, or getting any kind of resource that you want. That's pretty simple. The bottom actions are a lot more involved. They let you do cool things like deploying your mechs or building a building. And the problem with those is that they often have a cost involved that requires resources. Mechs need metal, buildings need wood, etc, etc. So you're not going to be doing the bottom actions a lot at the start of the game, and most of the time you're going to be focusing on navigating your workers to the right hexes that produce the right type of resource you want, that will then let you do a bottom action. And that sort of efficiency, that sort of I take something off the board and it reveals something on my player board, that is really why this game reminds people a lot about Terra Mystica. But the rest of it is very, very different. Welcome to General Efka's strategy tips for Scythe. Now, I'm going to get very, very serious about this because Scythe is a very, very serious game with a very, very serious start. You see, at the beginning of the game, it's really important to maximize as efficiently as possible what you're going to be doing, because you're going to be doing one of 2 things. You're either going to be producing or moving. You see, you could also bolster or trade, but those actions don't really give you a lot of benefit at the start of the game. When you begin the game, you will have exactly 2 workers and 1 character, and they will be distributed on different kinds of hexes depending on what faction you're playing. So if you're playing the yellow faction, you're going to be starting on a village and a farm, and that will produce more workers or food. And it's really important to analyze your starting player board at what you're good at. You will find very quickly that upgrades are cheaper for you because they only cost 2 oil, and enlisting is also cheap because it only costs 3 food. So you're going to be wanting to make food and oil. So naturally, the first thing we should do is we'll probably produce and make another worker and some more food. But wait a minute. That doesn't really get us anywhere, because if we produce another worker and some food, the food doesn't really advance us towards the oil where we really want to be. Now, to advance towards the oil, we have to cross the river, which we can't because it's impenetrable. But we could do it if we built a mine, which would let us teleport exactly into this hex, and then we would have oil. So we want to build buildings, but buildings cost wood, but we don't have any wood. So how do we get there? Well, we could also build a mech, and that only requires this iron, and we have iron here. So maybe we're not actually producing, we are moving our workers here, and then we produce twice. We can build a mech, and if we build a mech, we can unlock river walking, and we can walk all the way across. Do you see how involved and complicated this game is? These are just the two possible scenarios of how you start with this faction, but there are many, many more, and you can get yourself really engrossed into, what am I going to do next?
There are 3 different types of unit inside. You have your workers that will let you make all these resources. There's the mechs that are great in combat and will also let you move your workers around the board. There are also your characters, and one of the cool things that they can do is when they move onto a hex with one of these little pips, you get to take an encounter card. Now, there's nothing new about encounter cards, we've seen that before, but the really cool thing about these is the artwork on them. There's not a lot of text, but we were finding ourselves making up stories and things as we played, chaining, taking another encounter card, making a bit more of the story, and that was what we found really cool about it. And then you have the options that you can do that maybe will get you an extra resource or popularity or whatever, that really just round the cards out.
Every faction in Scythe is different and has different unique special abilities, but it's not just the faction board that you will get that changes how you play the game, it's the production board as well, because you might get a completely different layout of actions. But the most cool thing about it is that whenever you build a mech, and you can choose whichever one you want to build, it unlocks completely different abilities. So for example, you might get river walking, which will let you expand from this little starting landlocked bit that you have and let you move away into the waters beyond. Or you could get simply +1 hex movement per speed thing, and you will move far away like a striding hex that you are. But some of them are more unique, like moving between starting zones, which other players can't do. And most importantly, what I enjoyed about this unlocking element is upgrading. You see, every action you do is limited to whatever it says on the board. So if you're producing, you can produce on 2 hexes. But whenever you upgrade, you can just take this little bit off. You can just take it off and move it anywhere else you want on the bottom, and suddenly your mechs are cheaper and you produce a lot more. One of the things that Scythe does really well is your first game. In fact, I think it has crafted one of the best first game experiences in board games, because it's when you learn how your faction is different to the others and how the other factions are different to yours, that you really kind of go, yeah, I want to do that. And that's the cool thing, because aside from that, your starting game and the beginning of the game is going to be pretty much moving, producing, because you need the resources to do any of the bottom actions, and then to move, you need to move your workers to the right spaces to make your resources. Even making more workers is production. Yes, you heard me right. To make more workers, you need to put workers in a village, and then they will work and make more workers. But aside from that, you want to break up that monotony, because if it's all you're doing in this game, it's not very exciting, right? And the thing that's exciting is your faction abilities. For example, if you are the white faction, then whenever you get an encounter, you're not just choosing one of the things, you're choosing 2 of the things, which is incredibly powerful. Or if you are the Russian Rasviet faction, then you're not just restricted to doing a different action on every turn. You can keep doing the same action as many times as you want. So you can keep on going, produce, and eventually you find yourself with so many resources you don't know what to do with them. The other cool thing about it is that the different faction abilities seem to have been seemingly designed to accommodate different types of players. Do you have a hard time figuring out what you want to do on your turn and what more flexibility? Sure, play with the Rasviets. Do you want more free things? then play with Polonia. Do you want to have flexibility in resources? Well, then play this yellow faction, because every turn they can spend one combat card as any kind of resource.
Combat starts when you move into a hex with one of your combat units that already contains a combat unit of an opposing colour. You'll both take your wheels of spinniness and you will decide how much power you want to spend. And you can spend as much as you like, provided that you have it on this track. But the more that you spend, the less you will have to spend in future combats, and the weaker you will be, and the more scared you will be. Now that sounds pretty simple, but the thing is, we're in a kind of Cold War situation. It's almost a stalemate. I want to come in and I want to take these resources and take this land and send these guys away, because look at what it gives me. But if I do that and I win the combat, I will also lose popularity because the villagers will hate me. And we've already told you how important it is to have popularity at the end of the game. However, there's one more thing. If you do win a combat, you get one of these stars. And stars mean you've done good.
Look, like Elaine mentioned, there are very few reasons to actually go into combat aside from getting one of these stars. But if we compare it to a game like Kemet, where you were continuously encouraged to attack because every time you win combat you get a victory point, here, yes, you do get a star, but only up to 2 times in a game. And actually you will probably find that throughout the course of the game, you might not even participate twice in combat, because very rarely is anyone encouraged to attack. Look, what's going to happen in the game is you're going to build up your area and you're going to spread out just a little bit and make workers and make resources and have your own little place. But that's about it. There's not much reason to go out much further, with some exceptions. So this is kind of like a Euro game. This is a lot like a Euro game. This is a Euro game. But it has that one element, that player interaction, that combat aspect that is barely there. And I think that's why Scythe sometimes feel a little bit like it tricks you. You know, you think, okay, this is going to be a big 4X game, we're going to interact a lot, there's going to be fights breaking out. It's not what it's doing. It is mostly about taking an action, doing the top action, making the bottom action, and then looking at what's happening, you know, looking at your map and seeing, how can I build my resources better? Where can I build my new mech? Where can I deploy a monument? And that's it, really. And that does sometimes feel disappointing, especially if you do engage in combat. And then you suddenly lose. And you find that all your units that you took turns and turns moving to these places, all the resources that you took turns and turns making with your workers, they're all going back and your resources are lost. And that probably means you've just lost the game.
Scythe looks really epic. The board is so beautifully designed, and all the meeples are different, all the characters are different. Everything just looks really, really great. But it doesn't necessarily feel so epic, because it's really, really cool when you get out a mech and suddenly you can do something else that's cool. Or you build a mine and you can travel from that mine to any of the mines on the board. Or you rush in and steal someone's resources that they've left unattended. But it doesn't really feel so epic because you're all doing it on your own. You're not showing off how you've done this thing to another player because they're doing the same thing. They're focusing on their own board and on their own space. And for that reason, it just doesn't necessarily feel as exciting and as vast as it could do.
Elaine touched on a really important aspect of Scythe. It is mostly a Euro game, but with war inbuilt into it. And sometimes that just juxtaposes itself, and sometimes it does feel at odds with itself. But at the same time, the game has a lot of depth. Actually, we barely covered the rules of this game, because if we were to cover the rules, this video would go on forever and ever. And actually, if you want to learn the rules, you should probably watch Rodney Smith's Watch It Play rules tutorial, which will give you a better idea of how the game actually plays. But what I can tell you is how the game feels. And at times, it does feel punishing, and at times, it does feel great. You see, at the start of the game, you'll amass some resources and maybe build your first mech, second mech, third mech, and you find out that, hey, my faction's pretty good at building mechs. And eventually you'll place your first star for building mechs. And whilst it feels like it took quite a while to get there. Your ability to generate things increases as the game goes on, and suddenly you find that you have a 2nd star, a 3rd star, a 4th star, and everyone around the table has a 4th star, maybe a 5th star, and the game will end at any point. And that's where your best laid plans will come to either fruition or ruin, because when the game ends, it ends immediately and everything stops. You have no time to finish anything, and that feels tense. It feels interesting, and it feels like you've got just these few last turns to just finish this one bit that you wanted to do, and everything will either come together or fall apart. And that largely depends on how experienced you are in the game. You see, the thing with Scythe is the more you play it, the more you know about it, and the more you understand it, and the more you're likely to win. And I would recommend this game to people who play in the same internal group together, because they will be able to develop their own metagame, their own understanding of how to be better at Scythe, and you will hopefully build towards that moment where you're going, I see what they're doing and I know how to counteract that. I've got that secret ability that they might have forgotten about, and if I just use it, then I might sneak away some extra points and win. But in practice, I found that it doesn't happen as often in Scythe as I wanted it to. It feels more like you are playing on your own player board rather than on this wonderful big map. And I think that's what I wanted more from Scythe. And it might just be due to the fact that I received an early review copy and that everyone I've played with was either new to the game or maybe, you know, played it twice, and I have played it like 6 and 7 times. And it gives me a distinct advantage. It gives me a better understanding of what's going on. And I had to play it down. And that might be a problem unique to me, but it is how I felt about it.
We might have said a few negative things in the last couple of scenes, but there's actually a good amount of stuff in this game. But for that, we need to send you back over to our Eastern European correspondent, Efka.
Look, here's the real reality. It's easy in our position to find criticisms with Scythe, because that's not supposed to turn on itself, because we've had the opportunity to be the first people to receive it and to play it so many times before we actually had to put out our video. And because the game is really, really complex and has a lot of depth, it has a lot of moving parts and a really huge learning curve, you can find faults in it. But the reality is that everyone we played Scythe with has really enjoyed themselves. There was only one person in about 20 who've played it and didn't have a good time, but that's always going to happen with board games. And the reality also is that Scythe is a deep, complex game that rewards you for playing it more and more and learning the systems that it builds. And I think one of the most important things about Scythe is not just its awesome aesthetics that help you really get engaged with the game. It's not just the awesome artwork that is pretty much what the entire theme is built around. It's that Scythe is a game that you can't really compare to anything. Because when people ask me, and people ask me this a lot, they said, look, Efka, what is Scythe like? What other game is it like? And I was kind of forced to say, look, it's a bit like Terra Mystica, but that's actually a lie. The only thing that's similar between Scythe and Terra Mystica is that it has the same element of removing pieces and putting them elsewhere and unlocking things and making things better. But aside from that, those two games are nothing alike. And the thing I really enjoyed about Scythe is that it's unique. It's a thing of its own. And I believe that one day Scythe, when it comes out, it will become something that is just Scythe. Whether you like it or not, it will be a game that will venture forth into the yonder and find its own path. And I think it's time for me to put Scythe down and venture into the yonder myself and see what I find. Goodbye. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to us on YouTube, because you can see we work really hard to make these videos entertaining.
and we travel to Eastern Europe and all kinds of things. So thank you very much for being, watching, liking, subscribing and all that kind of thing. Oh God, it's really cold.